And if we go to the next slide, I'm so glad to welcome Victoria. She is not a new presenter, but new to us. So we're so glad to have you. Thank you, Victoria, for joining us and for presenting this work.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Patsy, for having me. I am thrilled to be with you all today to inform a little bit about culturally responsive teaching and how to create a practice for yourself that will allow you to be even more culturally responsive to the learners that you are supporting than you are already. So I have been doing this work of education to some extent for the past 15 years. My background education-wise is instructional design and performance improvement, and also facilitating learning and things of that nature. So this is fun for me. So thank you for allowing me to be part of the days in this conference. We are going to get right into our outline for the day. There's a lot packed into this short amount of time. We're going to go over and define culturally responsive teaching. We're going to review some of the principles. We're going to dig into the competencies of culturally responsive educators, and then we're going to look at some culturally responsive teaching practices. And as much as I love this to share information, a good portion of today is going to be you engaging with the content. As Patsy warned you earlier, there was going to be some breakouts. So just be prepared for that as we move through this workshop together. And before we get too far in, I just have a question for you. How do you reach students who are culturally different, racially and linguistically than you are? What do you presently understand or think about culturally responsive teaching? So if you wouldn't mind in the chat just responding to that question, what do you know right now about culturally responsive teaching? And we'll just take a few moments for you all to respond to that question. This presentation really is going to provide you with some background and some suggestions so that you can answer this question maybe even a little bit better than you are presently able to, depending on who you are and how you are responding to this question. So what we're going to be doing is some of the principles that include like affirming students' cultural connections and stressing collectivity, as well as we do that individuality. Culturally responsive teaching is really something that's about recognizing which groups have been empowered and understanding what voices have been excluded from our education. So this is an approach to instruction that really does attempt to celebrate culture and histories of all of our learners, rather than requiring students to give up some of their identities in order to engage with the instruction that they are receiving. So let's take a peek at some of these responses. Nice. Being a student, yes. It's a constant learning process, valuing the diversity within the classroom and creating space to raise up people's identities. You all are right on. What are we even doing here together? Y'all already know it all. Requiring me to recognize and actively deconstruct white supremacist cultural practices in myself and the curriculum. Yes, Chris. Recognizing and naming assumptions that we have for our learners, Andrea. Well, these are really, really good responses. Thank you all for engaging in that little bit of pre-testing, so to speak. Which is part of being able to be culturally responsive, is to know who your learners are and to know what they know, right? So that then you can tweak and shift how it is that you are approaching instruction. So well done. I really do appreciate your participation in that. There are 3 questions that are absolutely essential for an educator who wants to be culturally responsive to be able to answer. And they're on the screen here for you right now. What we are going to do is take a little bit of time for you to think about these questions and your responses to them. And then we're going to put you in some breakout rooms and get you talking right away around what it is, how you would respond to these questions. Because anyone who sincerely wants to practice culturally responsive teaching has to be able to answer these questions for themselves. So we're going to do a little bit of grappling right away. So Patsy, whenever you're ready, if there are no questions, and I can't see faces when I'm sharing my screen, so
No
if you'll let me
problem.
know if there are questions or things of that nature, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just going to ask Christine to put those questions in the chat so that everyone has them as we move into our breakout groups. And then I'll start those rooms.
So just introduce yourself to your breakout roommates, and then just discuss these questions for, we've got a total of 7 minutes. So you'll have a six minutes and then get that 1-minute warning whenever Patsy is ready for that to happen.
All right, off you go. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone. All right. If anyone's having trouble getting to their room, let me know. Vicky has had connectivity issues all day, so I bet that's what's going on. And then Simran yesterday was running a group in person at her site, so they just did small group work that way. I'm going to pause there.
Conversation. However, hopefully it gave you enough time to consider and then engage with one another over these questions. And if anyone, I'm really interested in just hearing from maybe one of the groups what it is that you were discussing briefly. If anybody wanted to just give us a sample of your conversation, that would be cool.
Feel free to unmute, or if you raise your hand, I can call on you too. And I know
we had a couple people in, this is Jeremy. We had a couple people in our group, and I agreed with them. I didn't really get to mention that because it went so fast, but like it seems that during the pandemic, our population our classrooms have really changed. Students who had been there aren't there anymore, and we're getting new people, and it kind of makes it makes it a little extra challenging to build community, because what we did a few years ago maybe doesn't always work with who we have now. And so yeah, the classrooms seem to have changed a bit. And then online learning, wow. I mean yeah, like the very different student. And so yeah, things are changing.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, that is the crux of the whole situation, is that the learners that we have in front of us are the ones that we need to be able to engage, and engaging with them in a more culturally responsive way is part of the process. And so thank you all for having the conversation around these essential questions. We're going to turn to a definition for culturally responsive pedagogy so that we can all kind of have the same idea about what this is specifically that we're talking about. So Gloria Ladson Billings introduced the term culturally relevant pedagogy, which you may have heard before. And she coined this phrase to describe a way of teaching that calls on engaging learners whose experiences and cultures are traditionally excluded from mainstream settings. And then Geneva Gay came along and she built on Ladson Billings' work and coined the phrase culturally responsive teaching to define the approach to teaching that emphasizes using the cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of ethnically diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant and effective for them. And so part of this whole deal is to build a trusting student-teacher partnership that around trust and developing rapport so that you can understand exactly who your learner is and engage with them in ways that are more effective, perhaps than you had been doing so before. And so part of that is really understanding what culture is and how culture shows up. It shows up in many different ways. There's the stuff that you can see, touch, hear, feel, and taste, those more objective parts of our culture, which are represented in this picture as the leaves on this tree. These are things that we can actually observe. And the things that are the trunk and the roots are the things that really guide our behavior and our interactions. These are more difficult to see, but these are the things that we need to be able to adjust to in order to engage in more culturally responsive manner, if that makes sense. So there's that surface culture, that shallow culture in the trunk, and then that deeper culture that is firmly rooted in how we make unconscious assumptions that govern our worldviews and things like our ethics, spirituality, our health, and things like even group harmony. So keeping that in mind is really important to be able to understand what is meant by culture when we're talking about culturally responsive teaching. There are some essential principles for culturally responsive teaching and to create a practice that is responsive to your learners. Essential.
Would you mind making my coffee, please?
If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that would be lovely. So being able to affirm our students, respect that diversity, recognize the learning environment is ensure that it's physically and culturally inviting, being able to bring in the cultural references of our learners is critical. So these principles are guiding our behavior when it comes to engaging across with a culturally responsive manner in teaching. What we are going to do, so as I said, we were going to be ripping and running today. We are going to jump into some competencies because this is where you get to discuss what it is that you currently do and how that might already be culturally responsive in its approach. So how do you do more of that and learn about the other competencies that are there. So there are 8 competencies that have been identified by New America in this report that they did, doing a 50-state survey and figuring out who is doing what and how is that culturally responsive. And that link is going to be pasted into the chat so that you will have access to the reflection guide that comes along with the report. In that reflection guide, we're going to go through and do a jigsaw where each group, we're going to create 8 groups, which means we're going to have some pretty high numbers in these groups. So we're going to need you to be really focused on going through the assigned competency that you are going to have and seeing what you can glean as you reflect on the competency. So what is going to happen is you're going to be able to, we're going to put you into these 8 rooms. If you are in group 1, in breakout room 1, you are going to be looking at competency 1. If you are in breakout room 2, you're going to be looking at competency 2, and so on. And I want you to just take a few moments and review the competencies that you're assigned. I want you to not necessarily go around and answer the question, but take some time and respond to what it is that is moving within you with regard to the competency that you are assigned, and then make note. So identify a spokesperson, and I'll be able to call on maybe one or two groups to kind of share what it is that you had discussed during the breakout rooms. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through all 8 breakout rooms, but the point is that as a jigsaw, we want to be able to assign different parts to different groups, and then the groups teach us what it is that they know. So this is a really good and interesting approach for those of you who've practiced it before, of making sure that your learners are also becoming educators and doing some peer education is the point of this whole process, which is part of being culturally responsive, if that makes sense. So we're going to take a few minutes. We're actually not going to take 20 minutes in these breakout rooms. We're going to take 15 minutes. And so you'll have, is that what I said, Patsy?
It is, that's right.
Okay, perfect.
So what I've done is 13 minutes, and then everyone will have 2 minutes to wrap up their conversation to come back.
Beautiful. So please ask if you're confused at any point, and if you require some assistance in your room, to let us know. But really, we just want you to review your the one assigned competency that you have, and we want you to think about what stands out, what's relevant to your teaching practice. How does it show up in your teaching practice? These are the things we want you to consider as you're looking at these and having the discussion with your group. And hopefully 15 minutes will allow you to get a little bit into a conversation, though you won't, of course, be able to have a super long, deep dialogue. So,
right,
Patsy, when
if
you're
you
ready.
are. Yeah, I'm going to
I
pause
am.
the recording, the instructions and the link. Thank you, Christine, for dropping those. And
All right. Well, welcome back. Hopefully you had a little bit of time to digest some of the competency that you were reviewing. And I would just open it up, and maybe we could start with group 1, and we'll see how far we can get in the next few minutes down the competency list. So if group 1, if you had a spokesperson who would like to share some of your takeaways, now is the time to do that.
do you want people to just unmute then?
Yeah, they could unmute, or if they want to chat it, they could certainly do that, but I love to hear voices.
I agree. All right, someone from group 1, be brave. Leah has voluntold Megan. How's that? Megan Boyle, are you with us?
Yeah, I knew you were gonna do that to me, Leah. Let's see if I can do justice to what we talked about in our group. One group member shared that she had the opportunity through her master's program to kind of get a cultural competency assessment, and she worked with a counselor through that experience to learn about some of the biases that she might carry. And another group member asked how that felt, and she said that it was kind of disconcerting, but also a really valuable experience that she was glad that she had. I had the best group. And let's see, what else did we have? Yeah, Damon was talking about the work that he did when he was at Falwell, which is I think elementary and middle school with kids, and just that he had the experience of helping them to create surveys, and they came up with their own survey questions. And one of the questions that they had was, why do the teachers in the school not look like the students in the school? And just the experience of and then the kids had to ask people or conduct the survey with people in the school. Chime in, Damon, or anybody else from my group, if I've misrepresented what we discussed.
Oh, that was great.
Add anything.
Great, good job.
Okay.
Wonderful. And so, Meg, and that was competency 1, which was all about knowing yourself, right? The
Mhm.
self-awareness one. Yes, thank you. How about group number 2 in competency 2, which I'm just gonna bump back here so we can see that, what those are as we're going through. Go ahead.
This is Jeremy. I was in group 2. I'll say a couple things. One of the things that it seemed like with the issue of systemic bias, we didn't really have an answer for how to combat that. It kind of seems like we were even struggling with like an action plan. And a couple of the problems I think that relate to that, or maybe why that is our students, I mean, with the language barrier for one, it's really hard to advocate for yourself. It's really hard to ask for more. And also, some of them come from many of them come from some very tough places. And the opportunities that they have, while they're facing systemic bias, they're facing individual bias, but the opportunities in front of them are so much greater than what was available to them from where they came, that they are just so happy to be here, so happy to be citizens, that it's kind of difficult to get them to face that there's a bias in front of them and to teach them that. And I think that might have been the only thing that I didn't hear Tong say right at the end of our session, but he had some really good points. And I wasn't sure if you wanted to try to summarize what you had said, uh, Tong, because I thought he had a really nice summary. He was in our group too.
Well, I was trying to say that at the end, I said that as we as instructor or teacher, educator, we really need to advocate for our learner who, especially the ESL from newly come from other country, as they really don't know the system, they really don't know the cultural response in this country. They thought everything is great, but again, there's a gap in between. They really don't understand anything. So as an educator or teacher, we need to advocate for them, or our response to help that they understand there's a lot buying it, but they don't see it because they are newly to this country. So that is what I was talking about that at the end of the section.
Thank you, Tom and Jeremy, for sharing about competency number 2, which is all about recognizing and addressing that bias that is within the system. And it is different than that individual bias, right? These are the system is designed to enable some and to hinder others. And so how then do we recognize and engage in the system on our learners' behalf? Absolutely. Yes. So as you can see, if we had another hour, we would go through all of these, all 8 of these competencies based on and enable and allow each group to share what they were discovering, so that we all have a little idea as to what this is when we break off on our own and are forced to do homework, right? Using a jigsaw method is really helpful in allowing people to get a little bit of understanding and to build some confidence in their ability to share and to be a peer leader. So that's really very important when we're trying to cultivate this practice. Thank you to the rest of the competencies, the rest of the groups, for being ready. I know you're ready to share, but we are going to move into some practices now that will maybe help you all move forward as we continue to along this workshop. So there are lots of culturally responsive teaching practices that you could attempt to apply in your work. You don't have to do everything, is the thing to recognize. We don't have to do it all, but if we can incorporate some of these approaches and actions into our work, we are likely to be able to build the trusting and rapport relationships that we need in order to engage our learners and have our teaching and instruction be more effective. And so being able to know who your learners are and recognize their name and pronounce it correctly is huge. You know, making sure that you're using culturally appropriate eye contact with your learners. Circulating and being around all of your learners, right? Not just the ones who are high achieving or high performers, but also the ones who may be struggling. Are you able to work near them and allow them to have some of that energy that you have for those higher flyers that may be in your classrooms? So using different types of clarifying questions and techniques in order to rephrase and reframe what your students are saying so that we're able to share in building of knowledge and things of that nature. And so there is a list of 27 culturally or equitable classroom practices that you can apply to your instruction that is meant that we're going to look at right now. And so we're going to paste that list into the link to this list into the chat, and we're going to break it to breakout rooms again, because it's more important for me that you all discuss the content than for me to sit up here and talk about the things. So you all being able to chew on it is what is crucial here. So look again at what we're going to do, and I forgot to do a list. So there are 27. And we are going to put how many in each group?
3 to 4 in each group.
3 to 4 in each group.
And then I have 15 minutes. Is that what you want to do still?
Yeah, we probably better pop it down to 2 to 10. And what I'm going to do right now is group 1. So how are we going to break? You know what? Here's what we're going to do. In your groups, because we don't have the capacity in this with this amount of time to really break it out, I want you to identify 1 or 2 of the competencies in your group that you would like to discuss. So if there's one that stands out to you in your group that you would like your group to discuss, let's do it that way so that we don't have to try to assign them to you. You just pick what stands out to you. And then we'll have another short report out as to what it is that you're taking away from these practices. And then we'll move on into ending and wrapping up this workshop. So we're going to put you in those groups. You pick the one that you want to discuss, or maybe 2 or 3, however many you get through in the 10 minutes that are going to be allotted to you. And we'll go from there and see you back here shortly.
Sounds good. And the link to that, Christine put in the chat. Thanks for that. And let us know if you need any help.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. And I would welcome 1 or 2 again, maybe 1. We'll see how far we can get of those groups to just share what you were thinking about the practice that you identified you wanted to kind of discuss.
We volunteered Anne for our group.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't know what group, wasn't sure what group I was in. Hi, everybody, I'm Anne. We had a really wonderful discussion in short 10 minutes here, but we actually talked about quite a few of these practices. We didn't focus on just one, but somebody gave the example of number 1, welcoming learners by name to your classroom, and how taking the time at the beginning of a course to really know how to pronounce your learner's name. And I know sometimes I have students who say, oh, it doesn't matter, teacher, however. And I think we all agreed that it actually does really matter to say our students' names correctly. That's something that our names are such an integral part of our identity, and that's powerful.
Indeed, you are so right. How about one more group?
Hi, this is Maya. I can comment from our group. We looked at number 25 about modeling positive self-talk. And just thinking about the experiences that our students have had in the past, or even ones they're having here, you know, as they are trying to navigate new systems and living here, and just trying to help give them self-confidence to help with their learning. Suggesting that they learn how to compliment themselves, or even just give themselves good self-talk. So not focusing so much on what they're doing wrong, but trying to help them learn and use their own language of what they can do to help them grow in their learning. So that was number 25 from us.
Beautiful. So again, you don't have to do everything. You can just pick the things that resonate with you to try, you know, to add to your repertoire. And then as you incorporate that more fully, then begin to expand and incorporate a new practice that will help you become even more culturally responsive. As you can see on the screen, us being able to be culturally responsive really requires us to do a few things. You know, we have to have that mindset that that's how we're going to engage. We need to be self-reflective. We need to be able to identify and mitigate those implicit biases. We got to practice social emotional awareness and hold that inquiry stance, right, about the impact of our interactions on our students. And then develop a plan to improve your teaching practice, which is what we're going to pop into right here, right now, is what might you need to do if you really want to become culturally responsive in your approach to teaching and be intentional about developing a practice. Here is what you might want to do. Create a plan for your own development. You know where you want to go, know where you are, create some measurable goals that you want to achieve. Know that you might need to break this huge goal into some measurable or achievable steps. Decide on deadlines for when you will achieve these goals, and then, you know, mark and track your development. See how you're doing. Do some tallying of your practice. How often are you addressing your students by name? How often are you engaging directly one-on-one with a learner, and engaging them in a way that is culturally appropriate for them? And just create a plan for your own development is really what this winds up being. This is an introduction, really just a very broad overview of what culturally responsive teaching practices are. And I would just invite you to think about that, to reflect on the materials that we were able to share with you today, to dive into that reflection guide around the competencies, respond to those questions, see where you are, and what it is that you would like to do differently, perhaps. Those resources are listed in the presentation itself, so you'll be able to have those at the ready in the future. And I would just like to leave you with this saying, in that we have to be able to recognize the importance of including our students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. Culturally responsive pedagogy and teaching is a way of thinking about and organizing our instruction so that it can be most flexible, and we can be most flexible in our teaching. And so we have to, as educators, work consciously both at transforming both ourselves and our practice so that learning can happen for all students. At the end of the day, that is what it's all about. So with that, I will just open it up for comment or questions and go from there.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Yeah, we do have a couple minutes for questions. Feel free to unmute if you like, or use the chat box, or you can raise your hand if you know how to do that in Zoom. there was one comment that you needed a couple more hours to really dive into this work, right? So I have a sneaky suspicion we'll be asking you to come back, Victoria, and do more work around this.
Well, it's really fun, and it's all about being able to identify for ourselves where we are and what it is that we wish to do differently. At the end of the day, I'm a performance improvement kind of a girl. It's like, I need to know where my gaps are, and then I can do what I need to do in order to close those gaps.
Yeah. So a couple of rather big questions in the chat, but see what you think. One is where to start, and then a related question from Leah: how do you approach systemic racism with your program?
Ooh, where to start? We'll go with that one first. So typically a good place to start is with that competency one, recognizing, or not recognizing, but being able to kind of know yourself and where your what your culture is and how you tend to approach things, what your preferences are, being able to be explicit, at least to yourself, about those things, so that then you can recognize meaningful differences when they appear, right? So being able to identify that, hey, this some of our learners are from really collectivist societies and cultures. We tend to teach in really individualistic ways, and so how then can we incorporate that, right? We're from the United States of America. This is where my home and things of that nature. So it's really individualistic until I get with all the folks from my family, or thinking about things like how people tend to take on eye contact. I'm from Chicago. So in Chicago, you don't look at people in the eye. You certainly don't stare at them in the eye, at least you didn't, unless you wanted some trouble. So recognizing that there may be different levels of comfort with some behaviors that we might read as disrespectful in some ways, that really have nothing to do with that and everything to do with culture, and being able to recognize that. And then as far as being able to approach systemic racism with your program, I think part of that is making sure that there is the capacity, right, to have these conversations. Can we create the conditions in order to discuss real, meaningful differences, and to let the data tell us what it is that we are doing? So how do we disaggregate our data so we can see who is being served and who is not being served, and let the data tell the story that then we can use to approach the systemic barriers to success, has been my experience.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to pause the recording, but I'm going to see if Leah would like to speak up.